Hello and welcome to the Page Turners here with Miss Beth at Pueblo West Library. And we are going to read some more of Roald Dahl's The Fantastic Mr. Fox tonight, and we'll see where it goes. We are on chapter 14 called Badger Has Doubts. Just one more visit, cried Mr. Fox. And I'll bet I know where that'll be, said the only small fox now left. He was the smallest fox of them all. Where? Said Badger. Well, said the smallest fox, we've been to Bogus and we've been to Bunce, but we haven't been to Bean. It must be Bean. You are right, said Mr. Fox, but what you don't know is which part of Bean's place we are about to visit. Which? They said both together. Aha, said Mr. Fox. Just you wait and see. They were digging as they talked, and the tunnel was going forward fast. Suddenly, Badger said, Doesn't this worry you just a tiny bit, Foxy? Worry me? Said Mr. Fox. What? All this stealing? Mr. Fox stopped digging and stared at Badger as though he had gone completely dotty. My dear old fellow, furry frump, he said. Do you know anyone in the whole world who wouldn't swipe a few chickens if his children were starving? There was a short silence while Badger thought deeply about this. You are far too respectable, said Mr. Fox. There's nothing wrong with being respectable, Badger said. Look, said Mr. Fox, Bogus and Bunce and Bean are out to kill us. You realize that, I hope. I do indeed, Foxy, said the gentle Badger. But we're not going to stoop to their level. We don't want to kill them. I should hope not, indeed, said Badger. We wouldn't dream of it, said Mr. Fox. We shall simply take a little food here and there to keep us and our families alive, right? I suppose we'll have to, said Badger. If they want to be horrible, let them, said Mr. Fox. We down here are decent, peace-loving people. Badger laid his head on one side and smiled at Mr. Fox. Foxy, he said, I love you. Thank you, said Mr. Fox, and now let's get on with the digging. 5 minutes later, Badger's front paws hit against something flat and hard. What on earth is this? He said. It looks like a solid stone wall. He and Mr. Fox scraped away the soil. It was a wall, but it was built of bricks, not stones. The wall was right in front of them, blocking their way. Now, who in the world would build a wall under the ground? Asked Badger. Very simple, said Mr. Fox. It's the wall of an underground room. And if I am not mistaken, it is exactly what I'm looking for. Chapter 15, Bean's Secret Cider Cellar. Mr. Fox examined the wall carefully. He saw that the cement between the bricks was old and crumbly. So he loosened a brick without much trouble and pulled it away. Suddenly, out from the hole where the brick had been, there popped a small, sharp face with whiskers. Go away, it snapped. You can't come in here. It's private. Good Lord, said Badger. It's a rat. You saucy beast, said Mr. Fox. I should have guessed we'd find you down here somewhere. Go away, shrieked the rat. Go on, beat it. This is my private pitch. Oh, shut up, said Mr. Fox. I will not shut up, shrieked Rat. This is my place. I got here first. Mr. Fox gave a brilliant smile, flashing his white teeth. My dear Rat, he said softly, I am a hungry fellow, and if you don't hop in quickly, I shall eat you up in one go. That did it. Rat popped back fast out of sight. Mr. Fox laughed and began pulling more bricks out of the wall. When he had made a biggish hole, he crept through it. Badger and the smallest fox followed him in. They found themselves in a vast, damp, gloomy cellar. This is it, cried Mr. Fox. This is what? Said Badger. The place is empty. Where are the turkeys? Asked the smallest fox, staring into the gloom. I thought Bean was a turkey man. He is the turkey man, said Mr. Fox. But we're not after turkeys now. We've got plenty of food. Then what do we need, Dad? Take a good look around, said Mr. Fox. Don't you see anything that interests you? Badger and the smallest fox peered into the half-darkness. As their eyes became accustomed to the gloom, they began to see what looked like a whole lot of big glass jars standing upon shelves around the walls. They went closer. They were jars. There were hundreds of them, and upon each one was written the word cider. The smallest fox leaped high in the air. "Oh, Dad, look what we found! It's cider!" he cried out. "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "Tremendous!" shouted Badger. "Bean's secret cider cellar," said Mr. Fox. "But go carefully, my dears. Don't make a noise. This cellar is right underneath the farmhouse itself." "Cider," said Badger, "is especially good for badgers. We take it as medicine, one large glass 3 times a day with meals and another at bedtime." "It will make the feast into a banquet," said Mr. Fox. While they were talking, the smallest fox had sneaked a jar off the shelf and taken a gulp. "Wow," he gasped. "Wowee!" "Ah," gasped the smallest fox, "this is some cider." "That's quite enough of that," said Mr. Fox, grabbing the jar and putting it into his own lips. He took a tremendous gulp. "Oh, it's miraculous," he whispered. "It's fabulous and beautiful." "It's my turn," said Badger, taking the jar and tilting his head well back. The cider gurgled and bubbled down its throat. "Oh, Foxy, it's like drinking sunbeams and rainbows." "You're pouching," shrieked Rat. "Put that down at once. There'll be none left for me." Rat was perched upon the highest shelf in the cellar, peering out from behind a huge jar. There was a small rubber tube inserted in the neck of the jar, and Rat was using this tube to suck out the cider. At that moment, they heard a woman's voice calling out in the house above them. "Hurry up and get that cider, Mabel," the voice called. "You know Mr. Bean doesn't like to be kept waiting, especially when he's been out all night in a tent." The animals froze, and they stayed absolutely still. Their ears pricked, their bodies tense. Then they heard the sound of a door being opened. The door was at the top of a flight of stone steps leading down from the house to the cellar. And now someone was starting to come down those steps. Chapter 16, The Woman. "Quick," said Mr. Fox, "hide." He and Badger and the smallest fox jumped up onto a shelf and crouched behind a row of big cider jars. Peering around the jars, they saw a huge woman coming down into the cellar. At the foot of the steps, the woman paused, looking to right and left. Then she turned and headed straight for the place where Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox were hiding. She stopped right in front of them. The only thing between her and them was a row of cider jars. She was so close, Mr. Fox could hear the sound of her breathing. Peeping through the crack between 2 bottles, he noticed that she carried a big rolling pin in one hand. "How many will you want this time, Mrs. Bean?" the woman shouted, and from the top of the steps, the other voice called back, "Bring up 2 or 3 jars." "He drank 4 yesterday, Mrs. Bean." "Yes, but he won't want that many today because he's not going to be up there more than a few hours longer. He says the fox is bound to make a run for it this morning. It can't possibly stay down that hole another day without food." The woman in the cellar reached out and lifted a jar of cider from the shelf. The jar she took was next but one to the jar behind which Mr. Fox was crouching. "Oh, I'll be glad when that rotten brute is killed and strung up on the front porch," she called out. "And by the way, Mrs. Bean, your husband promised I could have the tail as a souvenir." "The tail's been shot all to pieces," said the voice from upstairs. "Didn't you know that?" "You mean it's ruined?" "Of course it's ruined. They shot the tail but missed the fox." "Oh, heck," said the big woman. "I did so want that tail." "You can have the head instead, Mabel. You can get it stuffed and hanging on your bedroom wall. Hurry up now with that cider." "Yes, ma'am, I'm coming," said the big woman, and she took a second jar from the shelf. "If she takes one more, she'll see us," thought Mr. Fox. He could feel the smallest fox's body pressed tightly against his own, quivering with excitement. Will 2 be enough, Mrs. Bean, or shall I take 3? My goodness, Mabel, I don't care so long as you get a move on. Then 2 it is, said the huge woman, speaking to herself now. Carrying a jar in each hand and with the rolling pin tucked under one arm, she walked away across the cellar. At the foot of the steps, she paused and looked around, sniffing the air. They're down here again, Mrs. Bean. I can smell them. Then poison them, woman, poison them. You know where the poison's kept. Yes, ma'am, Mabel said. She climbed slowly out of sight up the steps. The door slammed. Quick, said Mr. Fox, grab a jar each and run for it. Rat stood on his high shelf and shrieked. What did I tell you? You nearly got nabbed, didn't you? You nearly gave the game away. You keep out of here from now on. I don't want you around. This is my place. You, said Mr. Fox, are going to be poisoned. Oh, poppycock, said Rat. I sit up here and watch her putting the stuff down. She'll never get me. Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox ran across the cellar, clutching a gallon jar each. Goodbye, Rat, they called out as they disappeared through the hole in the wall. Thanks for the lovely cider. Thieves, shrieked Rat. Robbers, bandits, burglars. And we'll stop there for tonight and start up with chapter 17 next week, called The Great Feast. So I hope you have a good night and a good rest of your week. Goodbye.